There is a moment that repeats itself millions of times a day across every time zone. A phone rings. The screen shows a name, not a stranger, not a Sama, someone familiar, a friend, a colleague, a family member, and the person holding the phone does something that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. They stare at it. They let it ring. They wait for voicemail. Then they text back, "Hey, what is up?" Not because they dislike the caller, not because they are busy, because something about the ringing phone itself produced a jolt of resistance that texting does not. Surveys suggest that over 70% of millennials report anxiety specifically around phone calls, not around communication in general, around this particular format. That specificity is the clue. The problem is not system, not social, it is informational, and the mechanism is more precise than shyness. Last month we explored the big architecture: solitude, sensitivity, trauma, connection, loss. This cycle zooms into the smaller daily moments where the brain reveals its operating preferences. Starting with the one sitting in the pocket right now, because the phone call is not just a communication format, it is a data environment. And for certain brains, it is a data environment with a critical flaw. Albert Mehrabian's communication research from 1967 is one of the most misquoted findings in pop psychology. The claim that 93% of communication is nonverbal is not what Mehrabian found. What he actually demonstrated, in a narrow experimental context, is that when verbal content and nonverbal signals conflict, when words say one thing and tone or facial expression say another, listeners rely overwhelmingly on the nonverbal channel. The number is less important than the principle. The brain prioritizes nonverbal data when evaluating social intent. Facial microexpressions, eye movement, posture shifts, gesture timing, these are the signals the brain uses to build its model of what the other person is actually thinking, not what they're saying, what they mean. A phone call strips all of this away. Every visual channel goes dark. What remains is voice, tone, pace, pauses. And for a brain that has been calibrated to read faces, this is not a minor reduction. It is like being asked to navigate a familiar city with 70% of the street signs removed. Technically possible, cognitively expensive. Farran and Watts, studying cognitive load in different communication modalities, found that voice-only interaction requires measurably more prefrontal cortex engagement than face-to-face conversation. The brain is performing constant real-time prediction error correction. In a face-to-face conversation, the visual channel provides continuous confirmation. The person is nodding, they're engaged, their expression matches the words. Prediction error stays low. The prefrontal cortex can partially disengage from monitoring and let the conversation flow on autopilot, which is why talking to someone over coffee can last 2 hours and feel effortless. On a phone call, that confirmation channel disappears entirely. Every pause becomes ambiguous. Was that silence agreement, confusion, boredom? Or distraction? Is the person still listening, or did they put the phone down? The brain cannot check. There is no face to read, no posture to scan, no eyes to track. So it generates predictions, compares them against the limited audio data, finds mismatches, and recalculates, continuously, for the entire duration of the call. This is why a 20-minute phone call can feel more draining than a 2-hour lunch with the same person saying the same things. The information load is not less, the information is incomplete, and incomplete data is more expensive to process than abundant data, because every gap has to be filled by active computation rather than passive perception. The brain is working harder to get less certainty. There is another layer worth distinguishing. Video calls, which should theoretically solve the missing data problem by restoring the face, produce their own form of exhaustion. Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford named this Zoom fatigue in 2021 and mapped its 4 primary causes. Excessive close-up eye contact that the brain interprets as intimate or confrontational depending on the context. Constant self-evaluation from seeing one's own face in the corner of the screen. A mirror that never turns off. Reduced physical mobility from being locked in a narrow frame that the camera can capture. And the cognitive overhead of managing nonverbal signals that arrive slightly delayed and spatially incorrect. The face is present on a video call, but it is present wrong. The gaze angle is off because the camera sits above the screen, while the eyes look at the screen, creating a permanent mismatch that the brain registers as avoidance. The timing of microexpressions is disrupted by network latency. A smile arrives 40 milliseconds late, and the social processing system flags it as incongruent. The brain receives face data, but it arrives corrupted, close enough to real to activate the full social processing pipeline, but distorted enough to generate constant low-grade prediction errors that never resolve. Video calls are exhausting not because they lack information. They're exhausting because the information is uncanny, almost right, never quite right, and the brain cannot stop trying to correct the discrepancy, which returns us to the phone call and the text message that replaces it. Texting eliminates the prediction error problem entirely. There is no tone to misinterpret, no pause to decode, no absence of a face to compensate for. The message arrives as text, the brain reads it. The social processing load drops to near zero. For a nervous system that is highly attuned to social cues, one that reads faces automatically, involuntarily, and with high resolution, the text message is not a lesser form of communication. It is a cleaner signal environment. The same content without the noise. The preference for texting over calling is not a generational quirk or a social deficiency. It is a processing optimization. The brain found a channel that delivers the message without the overhead. And this is where the honest nuance belongs. Because there are two versions of phone avoidance, and they run on different circuits. Version 1, the brain prefers text because it processes social data more efficiently in written form. The phone call is declined not out of fear, but out of cognitive economy. The person is perfectly capable of calling, they simply find it unnecessarily costly for most interactions. Version 2, the brain avoids the phone because the voice channel exposes something that text allows you to hide. On a call, there is no editing. No time to craft the perfect sentence, no backspace. The voice carries information the person did not choose to share. Hesitation, emotion, uncertainty. For someone whose social strategy depends on controlled presentation, the phone call is not just inefficient, it is an exposure risk. The first version is a preference. The second is a pattern worth examining. The phone keeps buzzing. Most of the time, letting it ring and texting back is a perfectly rational processing decision. The brain choosing the cleaner data channel for a task that does not require the bandwidth of real-time voice. Occasionally it is something quieter. A flinch away from the unedited version of yourself reaching another person in real time. A preference for the backspace key, the ability to rewrite before sending over the irreversibility of spoken words. The difference between the two does not require a test or a diagnosis. It requires one honest check. Is the avoidance about the format, or about being heard without a filter? That question is worth more than any label. On Wednesday, people who cannot stop saying sorry. The mechanism behind chronic apologizing is not what most people think. It goes deeper than politeness, into the fourth trauma response that nobody taught you about.